moving on to what we'll be doing today, we're going to go now through the review the amendments that we discussed on the 8th and 9th of April workshop.
Brigitte, just before we do, because I think I've got all the papers, just want to make sure the councillors have got all the papers, or is there any that have been raised that you think you haven't got, because there's a lot of different pieces. We could approach each other if we...
Where is the contaminated land for the draft chapter section 32? I didn't have. I have only the industrial chapter.
It's possibly up the front, and we'll bring that to you. We can only do contaminated land at 2 o'clock because the people who are involved in that chapter can only be here from 2 till 3, and this workshop goes until 3 o'clock. So that's likely to be handed out at that time. All right. So we'll go through the amendments. That might take us till... That might take an hour, maybe less, hopefully less. And then we'll go into the industrial chapter, and then lastly from 2 till 3 at the land contamination chapter. So, at this stage, I'd invite... You're at this stage? No, sorry, beg your pardon. We won't do the commercial revisions first, we'll do the definitions first. This is Alan Matheson. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the introduction, you'll see there's a small table which has just got one major change listed there, and that was in terms of the introduction. I'll do them in a slightly different order. We'll do introduction first, seeing as how it's chapter 1. The request, and we suggested to the Council last time around that we needed to put a bit more information in about what the actual zones were, and you'll see in chapter 1 the introduction set out starting in orange on page 11 is some description of the various chapters, including the various zones, and that goes through to page 14. So those are all the chapters and the zones talked about through there. They're really just a descriptive part of the district plan. There are no rules, there's no objectives, there's no policies. And so that, unless there's any other questions, we can amend that if councillors read that and think there are some other bits they'd like to have in that chapter.
Oh. Beg pardon?
Once you've had a chance to read what's in the orange in the introduction chapter, if there's any other comments you want to make, then please bring them back to us and we can amend. It is just an information part of the district plan. It has no rules, objectives, policies, so we can make some changes to that. Yep.
And thank you for clarifying that, because this was like an earlier request that we have the information presentable this way. So we'll make sure, because this is the introduction, we'll make sure we read that in our leisure time, as you say.
Well, I think it's helpful to have a read. It just does set out what the chapters are for the whole district plan, so I think it's quite a helpful overview to get right at the beginning.
Thank you, and at this stage I'll hand over to Leanne.
Oh, thank you very much, and apologise for being late.
It's fine.
Carry on.
Okay. I would just note that what we have given you are just some pages to replace in the chapter that you already have. So I'm trying to save a few trees by reprinting every chapter as a whole again. For the next few chapters, the introduction, strategic directions and commercial, I would like you to take the opportunity as we work through them to read each of those revisions to make sure that you're happy with them, so that when we do finally come to the committee to sign off these chapters to go to the Minister, we're not surprised by anything that might still be outstanding. So now we'll move on to, have you done the definitions?
We're just going to do them now.
So now we'll do the definitions.
Right, so chapter 2, definitions, and you'll see a table summary of all the changes, and then the actual changes are in, as Brigitte said, in chapter 2, and we've just printed those changes that came through from your comments. The first one was on accessibility.
Has everybody found those papers? The definition chapter, and there's a table that goes with it.
Yes.
That's right. And the table that goes with it, and that's what Alan's going to work through.
So hopefully these are all in alphabetical order so we can work our way through them. The first one is accessibility, and there were some comments there about ease of movement for the disabled, and we've provided an amended.
Have you all found your papers? I don't want to leave you behind.
Chapter 2, definitions.
That's
Yes.
correct, and there's a table to go with it as well. And in the orange are the revisions that we've made post the workshops on the 8th and 9th of April.
So the first one was, you can read across the column there, was the definition of accessibility. And then in the recommended amendment, or no change, in the orange there, we've included what the change is. And then you can see that in the actual chapter under the heading of accessibility.
May I ask a question at this point,
Please.
please? Thank you. My understanding is that when it comes to public transport, for instance, and talking about accessibility, that we actually have a measure. Now, I think, is it 400 metres for everyone to be able to access a bus stop, for instance? Is that the kind of thing we would look to include in this chapter?
I don't think we need to include it in the definition, but it's certainly a criteria that's used to define where zones apply and how, as you quite correctly point out, how we locate bus stops and so on with the transport network. But it's not something we need to define at this stage for our purposes in the district plan.
On a transport basis.
So why does it include money?
Because could be a cost for transport. What I'm saying is we don't need to include the definition of within 400 metres of a bus
Yes, I know,
stop.
but why would you include money in that definition?
Because some forms of mobility are a cost. And those could be a cost for a bus, a cost for a taxi.
Are you sure that's what it means, or are you sure it doesn't mean the opposite, which is it affordable to the city to provide?
Potentially, I can check that for you.
I just wonder why you use the word money. Money doesn't seem like a sensible word to use in a definition around accessibility. What's an acceptable money? I mean, it'd be acceptable cost, but if it was going to be, but then
Cost's probably a
why
better
is
word.
that in the definition of accessible? Where is it in the chapter that the cost would be a necessary implication of the definition? I don't know.
Yep.
We'll
We
look
can
into
check
that.
that for you.
So it's either cost or not there?
It is
Yes.
cost, yep.
And if I may ask, one on that, the word acceptable stood out for me too. For the disabilities sector, they talk about seeing the world through their lens. So, without at the risk of starting to get a bit pernickety about it, what one person's acceptability is may not be another's. So I'm just, do we go with that word? Do we go with reasonable, or do we go with another?
The word
term-
reasonable normally applies. I don't know why the word acceptable
It's
sits there.
used.
I mean, is that in the current plan, is it?
No,
I don't think
know.
so.
It's just that sometimes when you change a definition, a court will look at it and say they
Reason.
And I would hate to have a dispute around what the word acceptable means when the word reasonable is something that is used. Maybe we could get our lawyer to comment on it.
Yes.
Is there an issue with changing the word from reasonable to acceptable, or the use of the word acceptable?
As a matter of interpretation, I agree with you, Mum, that if there is an issue over the ambiguity of the definition, then the court would be open to look at the history of the plan change.
Yeah.
And they do.
So it might be a good idea to look to see what was there before. If acceptable was there before, then that might be okay. if it was reasonable before, it might be reasonable to use the word reasonable. Yep.
We'll do that and we'll bring that one back.
Yeah.
Yep, thank you.
Because it just seems to me, do we need if we stopped after reach a location for their ability to reach a location of service, that's the key factor, and the others are qualifications. Would we leave that with you?
Yeah.
So if you're happy to move on,
Yep.
Madam Chair, the next one was the definition of community housing unit and social housing. And then the comment there from the committee was the need to make that wide enough for affordable and public-private. There has been some comment from our legal advisors on this definition. There were some difficulties with it. And so when you look at the orange wording, you'll see there some wording there which applies to Christchurch City, Housing New Zealand, or a not-for-profit housing entity. So hopefully that deals to the affordable and also the private-public partnership aspect of it as well.
Yeah.
And you'll see the definition of social housing has been amended in a similar way.
Yeah.
You can see some strikeout there in relation to the Housing Restructuring and Tenancy Matters Act. There were some legal difficulties with that definition.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're happy with that, we'll move on to education. And I think the comment was in terms of in accordance with a systematic curriculum, and if my memory serves me right, that was Councillor Buck raised that issue.
Yeah.
So that's been deleted. And also there was a comment there was some comment there from the legal feedback. We need to actually include that trade and industry training is also education.
Can I just ask through you, Leanne, about the term for the housing, social housing one, but near the end on the second page, the term where there's a provision of residential units to help low and modest income. The term modest. I'm just wondering, do we actually mean medium? Modest, I guess, is pretty close to low, but is that what we want in a definition? And I'm coming at it, I'm talking about this from the basis that given the current high costs of rents and affordability of housing, that in fact it affects people on medium incomes too.
Is this has this been linked in with other definitions from other plans around the country, or is it linked in with any work from?
No.
Right. I mean, I don't take anything by it. I mean, low to modest, low to medium.
Yep. No.
The difficulty is, of course, what's low and what's modest will depend on the community that they live within.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's okay.
The next definition is elderly person's housing unit. My suggestion, the comment back here is no change, other than the deletion is redundant. I think, Madam Chair, I spoke last time that we're probably better to look at this definition specifically when we come to the residential chapter, because that's where it sits. And I think without that context, it's a bit hard to look at the definition in isolation.
Yeah.
So with your leave, we'll talk to you a bit more and explain that when we come to the residential chapter.
Yeah.
Thank you. Flood management area, I think this was a comment from Your Worship, and that's been deleted accordingly. My memory is we got into quite a discussion about garden and patio suppliers and so on last time around. And the comment in the table there is that it is needed. There's some need to put some certainty there, and make sure that we're actually getting the outcome we're anticipating in different zones. So the recommendation is that there be no change to that. Definition of habitat, and I love the second column, definition mashed up. Must be a technical planning term that I haven't come across before. So the comment in there is that the term habitat is deleted, it's not required, and it's gone.
Can I ask a question at this point? Please, do we define habitability, or is that something that doesn't appear in the plan as such? I know it's a potentially an arbitrary word to try and get a hold of.
It's not a definition at the moment. Can you explain why you would see that as necessary for a definition?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's obviously about the it applies to the quality of a dwelling, its suitability, its fitness to live in. So is that pertinent to a district plan? The standard?
I guess this is where we do have in the residential chapter, and it relates a little to the previous definition that we should come back to, and that is that there is an accessibility standard, what are they called again? One's Home Star, and that's about sort of quality of the building, and the other is Life Mark, and that's about accessibility. Those are the environmental factors that we can work with when we're working in a district plan context. So if you have those as standards in the plan, that in a sense is an understanding around habitability. Other aspects of habitability we can't impact on.
No. I guess habitability is that wide, but those things are only that wide. They're a part of it. So,
that's correct. But we are also constrained by what the Act allows us to look at.
Okay, yep. So it doesn't allow us to look at habitability as such.
Well, you'll see...
Just getting into that warrant of fitness.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When we get to that chapter, we'll explain those two standards that are in the chapter.
Okay then, thank you.
The definitions for minor arterial and major arterial roads, as Brigitte said at the start of this, we'll come back to you with a full response on the transport matters in the next session with councillors. At this stage, we're recommending no changes required. Those NZTA definitions are still draft. The definition of neighbourhood centre, Councillor Turner, I think, raised some issues in terms of some of the zones that should be in that definition, and those have now been incorporated, and you can see those in yellow throughout, particularly in B and C at the bottom of that definition. Orange, colourblind.